It was just 2 years ago when something happened that I still can't explain. In our town, there was this one house, abandoned for at least 2 decades. It sat deep in the woods, tucked away and forgotten. Nobody wanted to buy it, so it just faded from people's minds. Nature slowly took over, wrapping it in vines and shadows, turning it into something out of a ghost story. I've always been fascinated by places like this, silent, decayed, full of mystery. So one afternoon, when I had nothing better to do, I decided to check it out. I packed light, just a backpack and a flashlight, and set off. Normally, I'd explore with friends, but this place seemed less significant. Just an old house, right? What's the worst that could happen? The driveway was almost gone, swallowed by grass and time. I pushed through, flashlight in hand, moving deeper into the woods. It felt like I was walking forever, farther than I remembered. Then, finally, the house emerged from the trees, an old wooden structure built before garages were even a thing. It looked like a forgotten cabin, standing in defiance of time. One of the front windows was broken. I leaned in, listening. The silence was heavy. After a long pause, I made my way to the front door. It was slightly open, unlocked. I hesitated, then pushed it wide open and stepped inside. The place was falling apart. Dust clung to everything. But what creeped me out? The stuff. Someone had left everything behind. Furniture, picture frames, pieces of a life now crumbling. It felt like stepping into a frozen moment in time. I wandered through the first floor, weaving between forgotten objects. It wasn't big, so after just a few minutes I headed upstairs. The steps creaked under me, threatening to give way. At the top, a short hallway stretched out. 2 doors, one open, one closed. I peeked into the open room, empty. Strange, considering downstairs was full of leftover memories. My flashlight swept across the walls, then thud. My heart pounded. The sound came from below me. I froze. That was not the house settling. That was something, someone. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. I turned back to the stairs, moving quickly, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Everything was still, too still. But as I reached the front of the house, the door, it was closed. I had left it open. I grabbed the handle. It wouldn't move. Someone had locked me in. Panic set in. Someone else was here. Someone who didn't want me leaving. I ran to the broken window and climbed out, landing hard on the ground. I didn't stop. I sprinted into the woods, killing my flashlight, ducking off the path. My chest was tight, my breath shaky. Then, red and blue lights. Through the trees at the driveway's end, police cars were pulling up. My stomach dropped. They weren't here for me. I stayed hidden, watching as officers rushed toward the house. I didn't know why they were there, who they were after, but I knew I didn't want to find out. After a minute, I turned and ran home. For weeks, I searched for answers. News reports, rumors, anything about what happened that night. Nothing. No arrests, no reports, no mention of anything. Whatever was in that house, whoever was in that house, it was never made public. I was just lucky to get out. It was 2016, and I was living with my 2 best friends, who I'll call Jason and Andrew for privacy. We were roommates in a small apartment in the city, finishing up our last year of college. Between school and work, we didn't get much free time, but when we did, we loved exploring. Hiking, road trips, checking out random places, anything that felt like an adventure. That week, we all had Friday night off and wanted to do something different. Andrew mentioned hearing about an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. Supposedly, it had been shut down for years. We were intrigued, but also hesitant. None of us had ever done something like that before. Still, the curiosity won, and we decided to check it out. We took Jason's car and drove toward the edge of the city. The Midwest has this eerie way of just ending. One minute you're in civilization, the next, it's just endless, empty land. That's where this factory was. We didn't have an exact address, but after some searching on Google Maps, we found it. We parked a block away at a gas station and walked the rest. The streets were empty. No cars, no people, like the entire block had been forgotten. When we finally reached the factory, it was way bigger than we expected. Massive, with rusted metal beams and strange scaffolding that stretched out like a skeleton. Graffiti covered nearly every inch of the walls, even in places that seemed impossible to reach. The chain-link fence surrounding it had been cut open in several spots. Clearly, we weren't the first ones sneaking in. We slipped through the fence and made our way to a large metal door. It was already open. The second we stepped inside, I felt a chill. The whole building was shifting, groaning as the wind howled through its hollow insides. The only light we had were some cheap flashlights Andrew brought from his house. The room we entered was huge, filled with rusted machinery and narrow pathways between them. We stuck together at first, just wandering, taking it all in. After a few minutes, I found myself at the far end of the room. There was a hallway leading deeper into the building. I hesitated, but then glanced over my shoulder and saw one of my friends standing by the machines, watching. I couldn't tell if it was Jason or Andrew, but I figured they knew I was going in, so I kept walking. The hallway led to another metal door. I pushed through and stepped into a different section of the factory. There was a large conveyor belt in the center, rusted over and lifeless. Above me, a catwalk stretched along the ceiling, with a metal ladder hanging down at the far end. As I took it all in, I heard the door behind me open and then close. I turned, expecting to see one of my friends. But when my flashlight hit the door, there was no one there. My chest tightened. I knew what I heard. My voice echoed as I called out, "Andrew? Jason?" But there was no response. The silence felt heavy. Then a sound behind me, a faint scrape against the floor. I whipped around, and that's when I saw him. Standing barely 6 feet away was a man. He looked unhinged. Long, greasy hair, a tangled beard, and these wild, vacant eyes. The second my light hit him, he moved. No hesitation, no words, he just lunged at me. Pure adrenaline took over. I stumbled back into the hallway, slammed the door shut, and took off running. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps pounding against the metal floor. My friends were calling out, their voices distant but getting closer. As soon as I saw them, I yelled, "Run!" and we all bolted for the exit. We scrambled through the hole in the fence and didn't stop running until we reached the car. Breathless and panicked, I told them what happened. Whoever that guy was, he had been hiding in the factory, waiting for someone to be alone, and I had almost been his target. What he planned to do? I don't know, and I don't want to know. Since that night, we never did anything like that again. Some places are abandoned for a reason. This happened about 5 years ago. Back when I was still in high school, my best friend was a guy named Colton. We hung out almost every day after school, usually just finding random places to kill time. It was right after winter break had started, so we had all this free time with absolutely nothing to do. That whole day, we'd just been sitting around at Colton's house playing Xbox until we got bored. We needed something different, something that actually felt like an adventure. Our town had this old abandoned church at the end of a road nobody really used anymore. People always talked about it, how creepy it was, how it had been left to rot for years. But for whatever reason, we'd never actually thought about checking it out ourselves. That night, we were walking around near the edge of town when we passed the road leading to it. We stopped, looked down that dark, overgrown path, and without saying much, we just knew we were going to check it out. At first, just to see what it looked like up close. But if nobody was there, maybe we'd go inside. It was already dark, but the moon was bright enough for us to see a little. We also had our phones in case we needed a flashlight. The road itself was a mess, cracked, covered in vines, like nature had been trying to erase it for years. By the time we got to the end, the street behind us had practically disappeared into the darkness. Then we saw it. The church looked worse than I remembered. The forest was practically swallowing it. The old fence around the courtyard was barely visible under the thick weeds and vines. The whole place felt wrong. But we pushed forward, squeezing through a broken section of the fence and making our way up to the entrance. The giant wooden door was slightly open. We hesitated, listening. It was completely silent, no signs of anyone else. I put my hand on the door and pushed. The sound it made was unreal, like twisting, splintering wood, echoing through the entire building. We stood there for a moment, just looking. Inside, it was almost too intact. No broken glass, no graffiti, no sign of anyone trashing the place. It was like a frozen moment in time. Rows of old wooden benches sat perfectly still, collecting dust. It should have made me feel relieved, but somehow, it just made everything feel more unsettling. I took the first step inside, and Colton followed. The floor creaked under our weight. Every sound we made seemed to bounce off the high, vaulted ceilings, making it impossible to tell where anything was really coming from. Then, out of nowhere, a loud thud. We both jumped, immediately grabbing our phones and switching on the flashlights. The sound had been massive, but with the way it echoed, we couldn't tell where it came from. We scanned the room, but everything looked exactly the same. Nothing had fallen. Nothing had moved. Colton thought he saw another room near the entrance. Maybe something had collapsed in there? We decided to check it out. We made our way to the side wall, where a single door was slightly ajar. I reached out, pushed it open, and shined my light inside. It looked like some kind of storage room. Stacks of chairs, a few old wooden boxes, dust covering everything. Seemed harmless enough. But then, a sound, a slow, deliberate thump. Then another. It was coming from the main hall, from the aisle we had just walked down. We stopped breathing. Our eyes locked onto the small crack in the doorway, staring out into the darkness. Then, for a split second, a shadow moved. Someone, or something, walked past the open church doors and disappeared into the night. We didn't move, didn't make a sound, just listened. The footsteps had stopped. The entrance door creaked, and then silence. We waited. Seconds felt like hours. We didn't know whether to hide, run, or just stay still. Finally, after what felt like forever, we made a run for it. Sprinting out of the room, out of the church, down the road, and back into town. We didn't stop running until we were safely back under the glow of the streetlights. To this day, we still don't know who or what that was. There was no one else inside when we got there, no other doors, no way someone could have just been there without us seeing them first. Whatever it was, it had been waiting, hiding, watching us, and it let us leave.